example, if we say that cosmologically, so the part to whole distinction, obviously, in order for someone to claim that something is a fallacy of composition, someone has to have a perfect knowledge of the whole. For example, in the example of the elephant is big, but its parts are small. You know the elephant is big, and you know that the parts are small. The problem with applying this to the universe is that we don't have a full knowledge of the whole of the universe, especially in relation to what's outside of it. So that's the first issue. And the second issue is that we don't need to know, because what we are saying is the argument from composition, because we are making an argument from composition, and the argument goes as follows: that anything that is made up of parts is generated. Anything that is made out of parts is generated. The universe is made out of parts, therefore the universe is generated. Anything that is made out of parts is generated. A multiverse, say an infinite multiverse, is made out of parts, therefore an infinite multiverse is generated. And you can put, instead of the word generated, dependent, and that's fine as well. Now, how do we defend that? We say that, look, if the part isn't there, the whole isn't there. And so in many ways, if you don't have universes, you can't have a multiverse. So the construct of a multiverse, it wholly depends on its constituent parts in order for it to be meaningful. If it didn't have its constituent parts, then it wouldn't be a meaningful construct. So it can be conceived, therefore, that it can be some things can be removed from it, and some things can be put onto it. So that's the way I would argue for it, cosmologically. Ontologically, I would say that anything that could be conceived of in another way is contingent. That the universe can be conceived of in another way, therefore the universe is contingent. And putting it in the context of a multiverse or an infinite multiverse, anything that can be conceived of in another way is contingent. A multiverse, an infinite multiverse, can be conceived of in another way, therefore an infinite multiverse is contingent. What do I mean by can be conceived of in another way? I mean to say that no absurdity would occur if you remove or if you change things which are in that universe/multiverse. And the Quran indicates to this reality when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقَتُكَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ تَكُ شَيْئًا. We have created you before that and you weren't anything. Meaning, anything which is... So no absurdity occurred when we didn't exist, in the form that we exist. And so someone could argue, well, actually, we always existed in some energy form. But I'm not talking about some energy form. I'm talking because energy cannot be created or destroyed. I'll say that in the form that I exist, I didn't exist 30 years ago. As simple as that, or 31, 32, 33, whatever. 100 years ago, none of us in this stream existed. And so the point is that if you can imagine taking something out of existence and that no absurdity would occur, then this indicates the contingency of that existence. Obviously, if something has a beginning, then that indicates contingency as well. Because if something didn't, it emerged, so something which is necessary cannot be necessary at some points, but not be necessary at other points. Because necessity indicates eternality. Although eternality does not always indicate necessity. So yes. 2 + 2 = 4 is a necessary fact. Okay, and that would mean to say that you would assume that 2 + 2 = 4 is true past, present, and future. So it's necessarily true and it's eternally true. And so if we apply these things to the universe and the multiverse, you cannot argue. You cannot argue that these things are necessary and independent in those ways. And the fallacy of composition, therefore, is not a sufficient response, because even if we agree it can be fallacious if understood cosmologically, you cannot argue against the ontological reality. And you can even make this argument mathematically. You could say that any set more than one is contingent on its members is contingent on its members. An infinite set is a set more than one, therefore an infinite set is contingent on its members. So the multiverse idea can even be seen to be mathematically incoherent. If you want to say that something which is contingent can be something which is necessary, something which is made out of parts and or members, because members are the mathematical equivalent to parts in set theory format. So we can't say that therefore, because the compositional the fallacy of composition is really only applicable to cosmological realities. But once we transfer the situation to ontology, then you have a double problem, because we've argued this point now, not just cosmologically, but we can argue this point on a priori grounds. The only one thing one can do is try to say that actually the universe cannot be conceived of in another way, that it cannot be rearranged in another way. That and what do we mean by that? Of course, it can be conceived of in another way, because no logical absurdity would occur if things were taken out of or put into the universe, which are also contingent. So if things can be taken out of and put into a universe, which is and no logical absurdity would occur, that would indicate that it's not necessary. The job is done. And the fact that the universe is one way and not another. Now, if someone says, as some do, that what about the laws of nature? Why can they not be necessary? I say that even if you say that the laws of nature are necessary, which is something I don't agree with, but let's just say for the sake of argument, I don't see that as threatening to the postulation that there's a necessary existence, because the category of fact is different to the category of existence, where in the latter there's only one such existence, and the former there can be many such facts. We don't see an issue, because all these necessary facts ultimately depend on a necessary existence. That is because the category of existence is more foundational than the category of facts, because facts first have to exist before they can be. So the category of existence is in fact the most foundational category of all transcendental categories that can be envisaged. And so for that reason, if we can establish that there's only one necessary existence, then having necessary facts doesn't do anything to undermine that theory or thesis or threaten it. So I don't see or think of any other kind of interrogations that can be made to the contingency argument, except for those that I've mentioned. And it's simple. Without the parts, the whole cannot be. I mean, the reason why I wouldn't put an articulation that, anything that, to be fair, also Joshua Rasmussen has exactly the same articulation in his book, How Reason Leads to God. He said, dependent parts lead to dependent wholes. He said exactly the same thing. But I know that many of these unfaithful and belligerent atheists would jump on this articulation as a way to try and say it's a fallacy of composition. So instead, I would prefer to say something like, that anything that is made out of parts, and by that we mean something that can be detached or attached to something, because there's more than one mereological definition of the word part. But let's say something which can be attached to something, the removal of those parts indicates the dependency of the thing. The removal of or addition of those parts indicates the dependency of that thing. And dependency on what? Dependency on those parts themselves. Because if those parts are removed completely, then the thing ceases to exist. And if the thing can cease to exist, then the thing cannot be necessary. So if it's conceivable that thing
can't we just say to them that even if they try and apply the fallacy of composition on the dependency principle, we could say to them, well, it can't be applied because the fallacy is not a fallacy that applies to every scenario. They have to give a specific example. So, the